The old wolf should have run. Instead, he lowered his scarred head and quietly placed a shattered silver crown at her feet. The forest became unnaturally silent. Even the restless autumn wind seemed afraid to disturb the leaves. The cheerful songs of birds vanished in an instant, swallowed by a silence so complete that Lyra Ashwood could hear her own heartbeat. She stared at the enormous white wolf lying beneath the dead oak tree. Age had silvered his thick fur, and old scars crossed his muzzle like faded memories, yet nothing about him resembled a defeated beast. There was dignity in the way he held himself, as though he had once belonged somewhere far greater than this forgotten valley. The cracked crown resting between them glimmered beneath a shaft of pale sunlight. An elderly hunter who had been following Lyra stumbled into the clearing. The moment his eyes landed on the broken crown, the color drained from his weathered face. His bow slipped from trembling fingers and struck the frozen earth. He dropped to one knee. His lips quivered as though he were speaking to a ghost. That crown disappeared 30 years ago. Before Lyra could ask what he meant, hundreds of wolf howls rolled across the mountains. Not hunting calls, not warnings. It sounded like an entire kingdom remembering someone it had been forbidden to remember. The first frost always arrived quietly in Veildorn. It painted the mountain pines with silver, covered abandoned trails with delicate crystals, and filled the valleys with the scent of cedar and damp earth. Most villagers remained close to home once the first snow threatened the high passes, but Lyra Ashwood had never feared the forest. While others hunted deer or gathered firewood, she searched for the plants that bloomed only when winter announced itself. Her worn leather satchel was nearly empty. Only one herb remained on her list. Moonroot. It grew nowhere except inside the Forgotten Valley. Most people refused to speak the valley's name aloud. Hunters claimed strange, wolves watched from the cliffs. Shepherds insisted no birds nested there. Children frightened one another with stories about spirits wandering beneath ancient trees. Lyra believed none of it. Fear had a habit of growing wherever knowledge disappeared. She adjusted the faded green cloak over her shoulders and climbed higher into the mist-covered pass. Every few steps she paused to study broken branches, animal tracks, and patches of frost. Observation had always been her greatest gift. Her late father often said the forest whispered to those willing to listen. Today, the forest whispered nothing. Even the squirrels had vanished. The silence unsettled her more than any howl could have. She stopped beside a stream where thin ice spread across the water like cracked glass. Kneeling, she spotted the pale blue leaves of moonroot growing beneath an overhanging stone. Relief softened her expression. Finally, as she reached toward the plant, something large moved beyond the fog. Not quickly, deliberately. She froze. The shape emerged between towering pines. A wolf. No, much larger. Its white coat carried the gray of countless winters. Thick fur concealed powerful muscles that had long since surrendered to age. One ear bore an old tear. A faded scar crossed one amber eye. Yet it was neither the wolf's size nor its scars that stole Lyra's breath. Around its neck rested a broken silver crown. One side had shattered completely. The remaining half hung from an old leather cord, worn smooth by decades. The wolf regarded her with quiet intelligence. Not hunger, not fear. Recognition. Lyra's instincts urged caution, but compassion proved stronger. Very slowly, she lowered her basket to the ground. "You've been alone for a long time, haven't you?" she whispered. The wolf neither growled nor retreated. Instead, he took one slow step forward, another, then another, until only a few paces separated them. Lyra noticed fresh blood staining his front leg. A hunting trap. Someone had removed the iron teeth, but the wound remained infected. "So that's why you stayed?" She opened her satchel. Most wolves would have fled at the scent of herbs. This one simply watched, almost patiently. She crushed pine resin with healing moss inside a wooden bowl, adding drops of clear spring water until a thick paste formed. "You may not understand me," she murmured, "but this will hurt less if you trust me." For several long seconds neither moved. Then something astonishing happened. The great wolf slowly lowered himself onto the frozen earth. He stretched out the injured leg. An invitation. Lyra blinked in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like you." She cleaned the wound with careful hands. The wolf never flinched. His amber eyes remained fixed upon her face, studying every movement as though measuring not her skill, but her heart. When she finished wrapping the leg with linen, she smiled. There! The wolf lowered his massive head. For one impossible moment, she thought he intended to sleep. Instead, his jaws gently grasped the broken crown. He lifted it from around his own neck. Carefully, reverently. Then he laid it at her feet. The silver caught the afternoon light. Ancient engravings covered its surface. Not decorative vines. Wolves. Dozens of them running beneath a full moon. Lyra brushed away dirt with trembling fingers. I've never seen this crest before. A twig snapped behind her. She turned sharply. 3 hunters emerged from the trees with bows already raised. Step away from it, one shouted. The beast's dangerous. Before Lyra could answer, the oldest hunter pushed past the others. His gray beard trembled. His eyes widened the instant he saw the crown. He stared. Once. Twice. Then the bow slipped from his hands. No! His voice cracked. That cannot be. The old hunter staggered forward before collapsing onto one knee. The lost crown. The younger hunters exchanged confused glances. What are you talking about? The old man's eyes never left the broken silver. I saw this when I was only a boy. No one has seen it since the king vanished. Lyra looked down at the silent wolf. The wolf calmly met her gaze. Not confused. Not frightened. Almost resigned. Before another word could be spoken, movement spread through the forest. Branches bent. Snow drifted from towering pines. One wolf emerged. Then another. Then another. Gray wolves. Black wolves. Massive timber wolves. Silent as falling snow. Dozens surrounded the clearing. None showed their teeth. None threatened the hunters. Every single one walked toward the old white wolf. The hunters slowly backed away in terror. Lyra barely remembered to breathe. The ancient wolf remained lying beside her, unmoving. As the pack reached him, something extraordinary happened. One after another, every wolf lowered its head, not in submission to a predator. In respect, the entire forest bowed before the old wolf, wearing the broken crown. And for the first time in 30 years, the forgotten valley no longer felt forgotten. The hunters fled to report what they had witnessed, carrying news that should have been impossible. Behind them, the wolves remained kneeling in silent reverence before the old white wolf, while Lyra stood at the center of a mystery that could rewrite the history of Valedorn itself. Somewhere beyond the mountains, royal horns began to sound. Someone in the capital had just heard that the lost crown had been seen again. The wolves did not move until sunrise. They remained in perfect silence throughout the night, their amber and silver eyes reflecting the fire Lyra had carefully built beneath the dead oak. No growls echoed through the valley. No challenge passed between them. They simply formed a living circle around the old white wolf, as though standing watch over something sacred. Lyra barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the broken crown resting beside her satchel. The old wolf had not asked her to keep it, yet he had not taken it back either. It remained exactly where he had placed it, gleaming faintly beneath drifting snow. As dawn spread pale gold across the valley, the great wolf slowly stood. His injured leg carried more strength than the evening before. The herbs were working. Lyra smiled despite herself. I suppose you'll leave now. Instead of walking into the forest, the wolf approached her. He gently nudged the satchel containing the crown. Then he turned toward the narrow mountain trail leading out of the valley. He looked back once, waiting. You want me to follow? The old wolf blinked. It was the only answer she received. By midday they reached Ashburg village. Smoke curled from stone chimneys, children chased each other through muddy streets, and merchants prepared for the approaching winter market. Conversation stopped the instant people noticed the enormous white wolf walking calmly beside Lyra. A basket crashed onto the road. Someone whispered prayers beneath their breath. Others hurried indoors, pulling children behind heavy wooden doors. Only old Mara, the village baker, remained standing. She squinted at the crown protruding from Lyra's satchel. Child! Her voice shook. Where did you find that? Inside Forgotten Valley. The old woman's face paled. You must bury it. Why? Because some things disappear for good reason. Before Lyra could ask another question, Mara closed her shop door with unusual haste. One after another, the villagers did the same. Within minutes, the busiest street in Ashbrook had become almost empty. The silence followed her all the way home. Her cottage sat beside the river where medicinal herbs dried beneath wide wooden eaves. The old wolf refused to enter. Instead, he settled beneath an ancient ash tree overlooking the house, like a guardian. Or perhaps someone returning to a place he remembered. Lyra prepared fresh bandages and warm broth, but before she carried either outside, a sharp knock echoed through the cottage. 3 royal guardians stood beyond the doorway. Silver wolf insignias gleamed across dark cloaks. The tallest removed his gloves with measured calm. Commander Rowan Blackthorn. Stories about him traveled faster than merchants. The youngest alpha commander in generations. Unbeaten in battle. Unmoved by rumor. His gray eyes swept quietly across the room before settling upon the broken crown lying atop her table. He did not react. At least not visibly. Lyra Ashwood? Yes. We've received reports regarding an unusual wolf. I imagine you have. His gaze lingered on the dried herbs, neatly labeled shelves, and carefully organized medicines before returning to her. You treated its injuries. I did. Why? She frowned. Because it was hurt. One of the younger soldiers laughed softly. Rowan silenced him with nothing more than a glance. Then he asked another question. Did it threaten you? No. Attack anyone? No. Run? No. For the first time, curiosity flickered behind his controlled expression. Wolves don't willingly remain beside strangers. This one did. And you trust it. Lyra hesitated. I trust what it chose to do. What did it choose? She slowly uncovered the broken crown. The room fell silent. Even Rowan's disciplined composure faltered for the briefest instant. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. He recognized it. Not personally, but from stories. Impossible stories. He reached toward the crown. The old white wolf growled outside. A single deep rumble. Not threatening. Warning. Rowan withdrew his hand. Interesting. Very interesting. Most wolves feared royal guardians. This one challenged them without moving. You've seen the symbol before, Lyra said quietly. Rowan answered after a long silence. I've seen paintings. And they were removed years ago. Why? I don't know. He looked directly into her eyes. But someone in the capital certainly does. That evening Rowan rode back toward the royal fortress with 6 guards. Snow fell heavily across the mountain road. None of the soldiers spoke until the village disappeared behind them. Finally one asked, Commander, was it really the lost crown? Rowan kept his eyes on the trail. I don't know. But you recognized it. I recognized what history claims never existed. And the wolf. Rowan remembered the animal's eyes. Old. Wise. Unafraid. He had seen veteran generals with less dignity. No ordinary beast wears the weight of 30 years. The royal fortress overlooked the entire valley from cliffs of black stone. Inside its vast halls, servants extinguished evening torches while nobles concluded another day of political arguments. Rowan ignored them all. His destination lay beneath the castle. The crystal archives. Thousands of books lined endless shelves carved directly into the mountain. Dust filled the air. An elderly historian looked up from his desk. I wasn't expecting visitors. I'm searching for every record concerning the final years of King Eldrick. The historian stiffened. There are none. There should be. There aren't. Rowan pulled a faded royal genealogy from a nearby shelf. He studied the names carefully. King Eldrick. Then, nothing. The next page jumped forward nearly 40 years. An entire reign was missing. Not damaged. Removed. Someone had cut the pages with a razor so precisely that only thin scars remained along the binding. His pulse slowed. This had not happened by accident. Someone wanted history itself amputated. The elderly historian quietly closed the book. You should stop asking questions, Commander. Why? Because every person who asked them before you disappeared. Far beyond the capital, beneath the pale moonlight, Lyra stepped outside carrying fresh water. The old wolf remained beneath the ash tree. He was staring toward the northern mountains, not at the stars, at something beyond them, something only he remembered. Lyra sat beside him in silence. You knew this kingdom before it forgot you, didn't you? The wolf slowly lowered his head. A quiet sadness settled into his amber eyes. For the first time, Lyra no longer wondered whether he had belonged to history. She wondered how history had managed to forget him. As the first light of dawn touched the sacred mountains, an impossible miracle spread across Veldorn. High above the capital, the ancient moon tree, bare through 30 winters, burst into radiant silver blossoms. Priests fell to their knees. The elders whispered in disbelief. The sacred moon tree bloomed only once for every rightful king. And it had just awakened. News of the moon tree's impossible bloom spread across Veldorn faster than the winter wind. Before sunrise, every village bell echoed through the valleys. Hunters abandoned their traps. Merchants delayed their caravans. Even the oldest wolves lifted their heads toward the silver mountains, answering the miracle with long, mournful howls. The priests called it a blessing. The nobles called it coincidence. The common people simply whispered that something forgotten had awakened. Lyra stood outside her cottage, watching pale blossoms drift across the distant mountains like glowing snow. The old white wolf stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the moon tree as though greeting an old friend. "You knew it would bloom," she whispered. His ears twitched, but he offered no other answer. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he turned and began walking toward the northern ridges. Not hurriedly, purposefully. Again, he looked back only once. Waiting. Lyra smiled faintly. "I suppose we're not finished yet." She gathered her satchel and followed. The journey led them beyond familiar hunting trails into lands few villagers had ever seen. Ancient stone roads emerged beneath the snow. Cracked wolf statues watched silently from moss-covered pedestals. Massive arches, broken by centuries of storms, stood alone in the forest like forgotten guardians. Every ruin felt strangely alive. Whenever they approached an old monument, the white wolf slowed. He lowered his head, never in grief, always in respect. Lyra began noticing a pattern. "He isn't wandering," she murmured. "He's remembering." Hours later they reached a narrow canyon where a waterfall had frozen into glittering blue crystal. Behind it stood a hidden entrance. The old wolf stepped inside without hesitation. Lyra followed. The air smelled of ancient stone and cedar smoke that had long since faded into memory. As her lantern illuminated the cavern walls, she stopped breathing. Murals, hundreds of them, painted in faded silver and midnight blue. Each depicted scenes from the earliest days of Veldorn. Great alpha kings, sacred wolves, coronations beneath the moon tree, entire generations preserved in silence. The old wolf walked to the largest mural. A young king stood surrounded by countless wolves beneath a silver moon. His cloak bore the same crest engraved upon the broken crown. His face, Lyra looked from the painting to the wolf. The same amber eyes, the same scar above the left eye. Only age separated them. Her voice barely escaped her lips. "It's you." The old wolf closed his eyes. Not proudly, sadly, as though hearing a name spoken after decades of silence. Far away, Commander Rowan descended once again into the crystal archives. This time he carried a lantern instead of soldiers. The elderly historian waited beside a locked iron door. "You came back." "I came for answers." The old man studied him for several moments. Then, with trembling hands, he produced a rusted key from beneath his robes. "This room has remained sealed for 30 years. The heavy door groaned open. Dust swirled through the air. Unlike the grand library above, these shelves contained no polished royal records, only forgotten journals, letters, maps, personal diaries, history untouched by official hands. Rowan carefully opened the first leather-bound journal. Its pages were stained with age. The writer had served inside the royal palace decades earlier. One sentence caught his attention immediately. His Majesty refused to raise his sword against his own people. Rowan frowned. Another page. The council begged him to fight. Another. He said a king who wins by slaughtering his children has already lost. His heartbeat quickened. Everything he had learned as a child claimed the final king had become a tyrant. Yet these journals described someone entirely different. Someone merciful. Someone willing to sacrifice everything except his people. The historian quietly spoke. Truth survives in the places power forgets to burn. Meanwhile, Lyra explored deeper into the hidden sanctuary. Near the final chamber stood an ancient stone altar. Resting upon it lay a weathered ceremonial cloak. Beside it, an old sword, untouched by rust. The white wolf approached neither. Instead, he lay before the altar, waiting. Lyra noticed faint carvings beneath centuries of dust. She brushed them clean. Words slowly appeared. King Aurelian, guardian before ruler. Her breath caught. Aurelian. She spoke the name softly. The wolf slowly opened his eyes. They shimmered with emotion she had never imagined an animal could carry. Loneliness, relief, gratitude, no celebration, only quiet acceptance. She knelt beside him. They erased your name. The old wolf rested his head against her shoulder. For the first time since meeting him, his strength seemed to falter. Not physically, emotionally. A lifetime of silence weighed heavier than any wound. Without thinking, Lyra wrapped both arms around his massive neck. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. The old wolf closed his eyes. Outside, a cold breeze stirred through the canyon. One by one, wolves emerged from the surrounding forest. Old wolves, young wolves, even tiny pups. They gathered outside the sanctuary entrance, lying quietly in the snow, not guarding their king, keeping him company. As evening fell, Rowan continued reading forgotten journals. Every page destroyed another piece of official history. The final king had not betrayed Veldorn. He had prevented a civil war. Again and again, witnesses described the same event. The noble houses had demanded executions. Aurelian refused, instead of allowing thousands of innocent families to die in a war for the throne. He disappeared. Rowan slowly closed the final journal. If he never fought, he looked toward the historian. Then who wanted him gone? The old man hesitated. Fear crossed his face. For several long seconds, only the crackling lantern disturbed the silence. Finally, he walked toward a hidden compartment carved into the stone wall. Inside rested a single parchment sealed with black wax. The last surviving witness left this before he died. Rowan broke the seal. A family crest appeared at the bottom. His expression hardened. He knew that crest. Every noble in Veldorn knew it. House Varek, the wealthiest family in the kingdom. The family whose influence reached every royal council for 3 generations. The letter contained only one final sentence. The king chose exile because Lord Varek's grandfather had already stolen the kingdom from within. Rowan stared at the words. Outside the fortress windows, storm clouds gathered over the mountains. For the first time in 30 years, the conspiracy had a name. As Lyra and Aurelian emerged from the hidden sanctuary beneath the frozen waterfall, dozens of wolves suddenly lifted their heads toward the southern horizon. They did not howl. They growled. Far below, torches flickered through the forest. An army was climbing toward the forgotten valley, and at its head rode the banner of House Varek. The wolves sensed the soldiers long before human ears heard them. Every head turned toward the southern ridge. The low growls rolling through the valley were unlike the cries of hunting packs. They were warnings. Ancient, controlled, protective. Lyra instinctively reached for the old wolf. His thick white fur rippled beneath her fingers, but he remained perfectly calm. His amber eyes never left the distant tree line, where dozens of torchlights slowly climbed the mountain trail. Not fear, recognition. He already knew who was coming. Snow drifted lazily through the towering pines as the first riders emerged from the forest. Their armor carried the silver crest of the royal guardians, while behind them marched heavily armed soldiers wearing the Black Wolf banner of House Varek. Commander Rowan Blackthorn rode at the front. His expression remained unreadable until his eyes found Lyra standing beside the white wolf. Relief crossed his face for only a heartbeat. Then duty returned. He raised one gloved hand. The soldiers immediately stopped. The valley fell silent once again. Only the crackling torches disturbed the stillness. Lord Varek's captain pushed his horse forward. "There it is," he announced loudly, pointing toward Aurelian, the beast responsible for spreading rebellion. Several soldiers tightened their grips on their spears. Rowan did not move. "The wolf has attacked no one. The order comes directly from House Varek. I serve the crown, and House Varek speaks for the crown." A dangerous silence settled between the two commanders. Rowan slowly dismounted. Instead of drawing his sword, he walked toward Lyra. The soldiers watched in stunned confusion. He stopped several steps away from the old wolf. His gray eyes studied Aurelian carefully. Not like a hunter studying prey, like a man searching for the truth hidden inside a legend. "I've read the journals," Rowan said quietly. Lyra searched his face, and they describe a king. His gaze shifted toward the broken crown. "Not a traitor." The old wolf met Rowan's eyes. For several long seconds neither moved. It felt less like a meeting, and more like two leaders measuring each other's hearts. Finally Rowan lowered his head, only slightly, a gesture so small most soldiers failed to notice it. Lyra did. So did Aurelian. The old wolf gave the slightest nod in return. No words passed between them. None were needed. Respect had begun. The fragile moment shattered as House Varek's captain barked another order. "Archers!" Dozens of bows lifted. Lyra stepped instinctively in front of the old wolf. "No!" The captain smiled coldly. "You would protect an animal over your own kingdom?" She refused to move. "This wolf has shown more honor than the men hiding behind lies." Murmurs spread through the soldiers. Several lowered their weapons uncertainly. The captain's face darkened. "Commander Rowan, arrest the healer." Instead of obeying, Rowan slowly turned toward his own men. "No one draws a bow." The captain stared in disbelief. "You would disobey the regent?" "I disobey false orders." The words echoed across the valley. Even the wind seemed to pause. One by one, the royal guardians lowered their weapons. Not because Rowan commanded them, because they trusted him. House Varek's soldiers suddenly found themselves standing alone. The captain cursed beneath his breath before pulling hard on his horse's reins. "This isn't over." He wheeled around and disappeared back into the forest, his riders following close behind. The battle everyone expected never came. Aurelian had avoided bloodshed once again. Over the following days, whispers spread across Vale Dorn like fire through dry grass. Travelers carried impossible stories from village to village. An old white wolf wearing a broken crown. Royal guardians refusing illegal orders. The moon tree blooming in winter. Children began sketching the forgotten crown into the snow outside their homes. Old grandmothers quietly sang lullabies no one had heard in decades. One forgotten name returned again and again. Aurelian. Few knew who he had been. Yet somehow, everyone felt they should. At the royal fortress, Queen Regent Celine stood alone inside the Hall of Kings. Towering statues of past rulers watched over the silent chamber. Her royal advisor approached carefully. "The stories continue to spread. I know. The people are beginning to ask questions. They always do. And House Varek demands immediate action." Celine closed her eyes. She had inherited the throne while still young. She had inherited something else as well. A history she had never been permitted to question. For years she believed silence protected peace. Now, she wasn't certain anymore. "What if," she whispered almost to herself, "peace built upon a lie was never peace at all?" The advisor had no answer. Meanwhile, Lyra and Rowan traveled together through the northern villages. Not as friends. Not yet. As reluctant allies. Rowan rarely spoke unless necessary. Instead, he watched. He noticed how every injured animal approached Lyra without fear. How frightened children smiled when she knelt to speak with them. How even wild wolves appeared from nearby forests simply to walk beside her for a while before disappearing again. One evening they stopped beside a frozen river. Rowan quietly handed her a warm cup of cedar tea. "You never asked why I believed you." She accepted it. "No, I wasn't sure myself." He looked toward the old wolf resting beneath nearby pines. "My father died believing the final king betrayed Vale Dorn. And now, I think he died protecting the wrong story." The admission seemed to cost him. Lyra said nothing. She simply sat beside him in comfortable silence. For the first time, neither of them felt alone. Days later, they reached the sacred moon tree. Its silver blossoms still glowed despite the deepening winter. Thousands of wolves already surrounded its roots. Gray wolves, black wolves, snow-white elders, young pups. Every pack in Vale Dorn had gathered without being summoned. Villagers watched from a respectful distance. No one dared interrupt. Aurelian slowly walked toward the ancient tree. The broken crown still hung around his neck. As he stepped beneath the silver branches, moonlight poured through the clouds although the sun had not yet fully set. The blossoms began falling around him like shimmering snow. Every wolf lowered its head. Every person instinctively followed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. A deep silver light surrounded the old wolf. At first it shimmered across his scarred fur. Then it grew brighter. Brighter still. The wolves remained perfectly silent. No howl. No movement. Only reverence. Lyra shielded her eyes as the light expanded beneath the moon tree. When it finally faded, the ancient wolf was gone. Standing beneath the silver blossoms was a tall man with snow-white hair falling to his shoulders. Old scars crossed his weathered face. Amber eyes, filled with endless sorrow and quiet strength, looked upon the kingdom he had not seen with human eyes for 3 decades. The broken crown still rested in his hands. At last, the forgotten king had returned. No one dared speak. Then, from somewhere within the gathered crowd, an elderly woman fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her trembling voice broke the silence. "Welcome home, Your Majesty." Across the sacred valley, thousands of wolves lifted their heads and held together, not in mourning but in remembrance. Far away, inside the royal fortress, Lord Varek heard the echoes and quietly reached for his sword, knowing the kingdom had begun to remember the king he thought history had erased forever. No one moved. The sacred moon tree stood bathed in silver light, its blossoms drifting lazily through the winter air like stars that had forgotten the sky. The wolves remained bowed. Thousands of villagers stood frozen around the clearing. None of them looked at the ancient tree anymore. Every eye rested upon the man standing beneath it. 30 years of silence had finally taken human form. Aurelian's long white hair stirred gently in the mountain wind. Time had carved lines across his face, but they were not the marks of weakness. They were the marks of a ruler who had carried the suffering of an entire kingdom without allowing it to consume his heart. His amber eyes slowly swept across the gathering. He recognized places, old banners, family crests, even faces that had grown old while he remained hidden. Many of those staring back had been children when he disappeared. Now they stood with gray hair and grandchildren beside them. For a long while, Aurelian simply smiled. It was not the smile of a king returning to reclaim power. It was the smile of a father finally finding his family again. The elderly woman, who had welcomed him home, stepped forward with trembling legs. Her walking cane slipped from her hands. Before she could fall, Aurelian gently caught her. She looked into his face, tears flowing freely. "You remembered me," she whispered. Aurelian softly shook his head. "I never forgot any of you." The woman pressed her forehead against his hands and wept openly. One after another, more elders stepped forward. An old blacksmith, a retired hunter, a widow whose husband had once served in the royal guard. Each carried memories buried beneath decades of fear. None asked why he had abandoned them. Instead, they asked the same heartbreaking question. "Why didn't you come home?" Silence settled over the valley. Even the wolves lowered themselves closer to the earth. Aurelian looked toward the mountains before finally answering. "Because I loved you too much." The words drifted through the valley with painful gentleness. "When hatred entered the royal council, my generals begged me to raise an army. My advisors demanded executions. Noble houses called for blood." His voice never rose. "I saw brothers preparing to kill brothers." He closed his eyes for a moment. "If I had fought for my throne, every valley in Veldorn would have become a battlefield." He slowly looked toward the families gathered beneath the moon tree. "I could save my crown." His fingers tightened around the broken silver. "Or I could save my people." No one spoke. Several warriors quietly lowered their heads. The old king continued. "So I allowed history to condemn me." "You let them call you a traitor?" someone asked through tears. "I let them call me whatever they needed, if it meant your children would grow up knowing peace instead of war." A silence deeper than grief settled over the valley. Lyra felt tears gathering in her own eyes. For years she had blamed herself for failing to save her younger brother. Standing before Aurelian, she realized what true sacrifice looked like. He had not lost one family member. He had willingly lost an entire kingdom. As evening settled across the mountains, Aurelian asked Lyra to walk with him beyond the moon tree. They climbed a narrow ridge overlooking the valley. The wolves quietly remained behind. Only Rowan followed at a respectful distance before stopping beside a weathered stone arch. He understood this conversation belonged to them alone. Aurelian rested one hand upon an ancient monument carved with faded vines. "My last royal healer stood here the morning I left." Lyra looked toward him. He begged me to stay. What happened to him? He refused. Aurelian smiled sadly. He said no king should walk into exile alone. The old king reached beneath the stone and withdrew a small cedar box sealed with faded wax. Time had darkened the wood, yet the carving upon its lid remained clear. A flowering ash tree, the same symbol hanging above Lyra's cottage door. Confused, she accepted the box. Inside rested an old silver pendant, a bundle of carefully preserved letters, and a faded family journal. The first page bore a familiar name, Elias Ashwood, Lyra's grandfather. Her breath caught. He served you. Aurelian nodded. Not only him. He gently turned several pages. His father before him. Another page. And his mother before that. Generation after generation, the Ashwoods had served as royal healers. Not because they were ordered to, because they believed mercy deserved protection. Lyra's hands trembled. My father never told me. He couldn't. Why? Because every generation of your family carried the same promise. Aurelian looked directly into her eyes. If anyone ever discovered where I lived, they would protect my secret, even if history forgot theirs. She opened another letter. Her father's handwriting, written shortly before his death. If my daughter ever finds you, it means the kingdom is finally ready to remember. Tears blurred the words. Her father had known. All those years, he had carried the truth alone. Below the mountain, Rowan suddenly noticed movement beyond the southern ridge. Hundreds of torches, not villagers, soldiers, fast-moving, organized. One scout sprinted toward him, breathless. Commander! Rowan turned sharply. What happened? House Varek has seized the southern gates. Another scout arrived moments later. The eastern barracks have surrendered. Then a third. The capital is under military control. Rowan's expression hardened. It has begun. Far below, black banners bearing House Varek's crest rose above the roads leading toward the royal fortress. Lord Varek had abandoned secrecy. If truth could no longer be buried, he would drown it in war. Night covered the sacred valley. The gathered wolves rose together. Not with panic, with purpose. Every pack instinctively formed protective circles around the families sheltering beneath the moon tree. Pups were guided safely toward the center. The oldest wolves stood along the outer edge. Ready, patient, disciplined. Aurelian quietly watched them. The wolves remember. Lyra looked toward the frightened villagers. So must the people. She stepped onto the ancient stone platform beneath the moon tree. Without raising her voice, she spoke clearly enough for every person to hear. The kingdom has lived with fear for 30 years. She held up the Ashwood journal. My family protected one man. She looked toward Aurelian. He protected everyone. One by one, people began kneeling. Not because a king demanded it, because truth deserved it. At that very moment, moonlight struck the broken crown resting in Aurelian's hands. A soft silver glow spread across its shattered edges. The fractured pieces slowly trembled. Tiny cracks of light reached toward one another like forgotten memories, finding their way home. The broken crown was beginning to mend itself. As the silver light brightened, a deafening war horn echoed from the southern mountains. Lord Varek's army had reached the sacred valley. Thousands of armored soldiers surrounded the ancient sanctuary, while black banners darkened the snowy hills. Aurelian slowly lifted the half-restored crown. For the first time in 30 years, the forgotten king did not step backward. He stepped forward to meet the army that had stolen his name. The valley waited. Snow drifted silently between thousands of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder beneath black banners, bearing the crest of House Varek. Steel glimmered beneath the pale morning sky, and horses stamped nervously against the frozen earth. Opposite them stood no great army, only villagers, royal guardians, a healer, an old king, and wolves, hundreds upon hundreds of wolves, gray wolves, black wolves, snow-white elders, young hunters barely old enough to leave their packs. They stood together beneath the sacred moon tree without growling, without charging, without fear. Lord Varek slowly rode to the front of his army. His polished black armor reflected the winter sunlight, and a crimson cloak billowed behind him like a trail of blood. His sharp eyes settled upon Aurelian. For several moments he simply stared. Then he laughed. So the ghost finally remembers how to wear a man's face. No one answered. Varek's smile widened. You disappeared for 30 years. His voice echoed across the valley. The kingdom survived. It grew stronger. It forgot you. He pointed toward the broken crown. You have nothing left. Aurelian looked calmly across the gathered soldiers. His voice was quiet, yet every person heard it. I never came to reclaim what was mine. A ripple of confusion passed through the army. I came to return what belongs to them. He looked toward the people of Valedorn. The truth. Silence answered him. The words carried no threat. Only peace. Lord Varek's face darkened. You speak of peace because you lost. I speak of peace because I refuse to let fathers bury their sons. Varek drew his sword. I would have won. Aurelian slowly nodded. I know. And how many children would have died for your victory? The question struck the valley harder than any weapon. No one moved. Even many of Varek's own soldiers lowered their eyes. For years they had been taught that Aurelian fled because he was weak. Standing before them now, they saw no weakness, only a man who had sacrificed everything so they would never have to fight one another. Lord Varek realized something terrifying. He was losing, not the battle, the hearts of his soldiers. His voice rose. Archers! Several companies hesitated. Loose! No arrows flew. The captains exchanged uncertain glances. One elderly archer slowly lowered his bow. My grandfather served King Aurelian. Another followed. My mother always said the stories never made sense. A third removed the black ribbon from his armor. One by one, spears lowered, bows relaxed. Shields fell against the snow, not because they feared Aurelian, because they no longer believed Varek. The lie that had ruled Valedorn for 30 years began breaking apart before everyone's eyes. Fury twisted across Lord Varek's face. You fools! He spurred his horse forward. If none of you will protect this kingdom, I will. Sword raised, he charged directly toward Aurelian. Rowan moved instantly. Steel flashed. He stepped between them. The clash echoed across the valley. For several powerful exchanges, the two commanders fought across the snow. Neither spoke. Only the ringing of steel filled the air. Rowan fought with disciplined precision. Varek fought with desperation. The difference became clearer with every strike. At last Varek stumbled. His sword flew from his hand and buried itself in the frozen ground several paces away. Rowan placed his blade against the nobleman's chest. The valley fell silent. Everyone waited. 30 years earlier another king had faced the same choice. Vengeance or mercy? Rowan looked toward Aurelian. The old king slowly shook his head. No more blood. Without hesitation Rowan lowered his sword. You will stand trial. Lord Varek stared in disbelief. You won't kill me? Aurelian answered softly. If I begin my return with revenge, then history has learned nothing. Royal guardians stepped forward and peacefully placed Varek in chains. Not one wolf attacked him. Not one soldier struck him. Justice would replace vengeance, exactly as the forgotten king had once hoped. As the last echoes of conflict faded, silver light spread once more beneath the moon tree. The broken crown resting in Aurelian's hands shimmered. Cracks that had scarred the ancient silver for decades slowly disappeared. Tiny fragments floated together like pieces of moonlight returning home. Before thousands of witnesses, the crown became whole. An elderly priestess approached carrying an ancient velvet cloth. Her blind eyes filled with tears. I have waited my entire life for this day. She lifted the restored crown. According to Valedorn's oldest tradition, wolves chose the ruler before the people did. The valley became utterly still. The largest white wolf stepped forward. Then another. Then another. Soon every wolf in the sacred valley stood before Aurelian. Slowly, together, they bowed. Not one remained standing. The sacred moon pack had spoken. The rightful king had never been forgotten, only hidden. The priestess placed the restored crown upon Aurelian's head. Cheers did not erupt immediately. Instead, people cried. Parents embraced children. Old warriors wept openly. Generations of grief quietly dissolved beneath falling silver blossoms. Queen Regent Celine walked through the gathered crowd alone. She removed her royal cloak, then her jeweled circlet. Stopping before Aurelian, she knelt. I inherited a throne. She lowered her head. And a lie. I lacked the courage to question either. Aurelian gently helped her stand. You preserved peace with the truth you believed. I should have searched harder. We all carry burdens inherited from those before us. He smiled kindly. The measure of a ruler is not whether they inherit mistakes. It is whether they choose to end them. Tears filled Celine's eyes. For the first time since becoming queen, she felt free. Weeks later, the Hall of Forgotten Kings opened for the first time in decades. Missing pages returned to the crystal archives. Children learned Aurelian's true story beside warm hearths instead of frightened whispers. The Forgotten Valley became protected ground where no wolf could ever again be hunted. Lyra continued healing anyone who arrived at her door. Nothing about her kindness changed, only the number of people seeking it. One quiet evening, Rowan found her beneath the old ash tree outside her cottage. Snow fell gently around them. I've spent most of my life believing duty came before everything. Lyra smiled softly. And now, I've learned duty without truth becomes obedience. He hesitated, something far more difficult than facing an army. I don't know what tomorrow brings. She looked at him. Neither do I. He offered his hand. Would you face it with me? She did not answer with grand speeches. She simply placed her hand in his. Choice, not destiny. Trust, not obligation. Love had arrived exactly as quietly as winter. 1 year later, children laughed beneath the blooming moon tree, while wolf pups chased one another through fresh snow. The once-forgotten valley had become the safest place in Valedorn. Near the weathered oak, where everything had begun, Aurelian stood once more in his white wolf form. His fur shimmered beneath the morning light. Beside him walked Lyra and Rowan. A playful young wolf pup trotted ahead, carrying the restored crown in its mouth. Instead of taking it for himself, Aurelian gently nudged the pup toward Lyra. She laughed as the little wolf carefully placed the crown at her feet, not as an invitation to rule, but as a reminder. Crowns belong to kingdoms. Truth belonged to everyone. The old wolf lifted his face toward the rising sun. Once, the kingdom had forgotten his name. Now every child knew it, not because he had conquered his enemies, but because he had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. And as the wolves' peaceful howls echoed through the mountains, Valedorn finally understood that the strongest kings were never remembered for the battles they won. They were remembered for the wars they refused to begin.